Hey, you crazy kids. This is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam. I haven't made a video in a very long time. I'm making one because I have a perfect excuse. I'm in Japan and my hotel gave me an awesome kimono to wear, and it's one of those really cool traditional hotels with, like, those traditional chairs and tables and a sort of mattress on the floor. And I am in Lake Kawaguchi, which is on the foot of Mount Fuji. So part of the reason that I haven't been making videos is because the rate at which my meditation and my endeavors in transformation is going has accelerated to such a pace that it's a little bit difficult to keep track on exactly what is going on. And I've been mostly dedicated to my own practice and to journaling. But things are a little bit more stable right now, and since I'm traveling, it's always cool to share a bit. And today's video, I wanted to share an insight that arose about the ego. So I will read a passage of something that I journaled about it, and then we can get into it. So I wrote on July 6th, I realized that the I amness, or the sense of egoic individuality, needs to be thanked. It's not to be tolerated, gotten rid of, rejected, or hoped away. It needs to be totally surrendered to with love. This mechanism has kept us alive and sane for as long as we've been around. It is a guardian that is faithful and intelligent. It cannot be tricked or bypassed. This is probably going to be one of the big points about this video. It's not sneaky. It simply knows by default what you are ready and aware enough to face. And I also wrote, ego has wisdom and is a measure of wisdom. And here wisdom is understood as the Chinese character De, which is used in the phrase Dao De Jing, as that which is between pure yang or pure awareness and pure yin or pure essence. So it's the connectivity between the two, is the funneling or open channeling between knowing and being, essentially. And then I go on about some other stuff that I might make separate videos for. But so the reason I thought this was an interesting insight is because in much of the traditional and also modern spiritual literature, the mechanism of the ego is made to be sort of the bad guy and the trickster who should be mistrusted and eliminated and cut out as much as possible. Now, that is understandable, considering that from a perceptual or from a subjective perspective, that's how it appears. If you look a little bit closer at developmental psychology, you would come to understand that the ego is a kind of necessary contraction of the mind that takes place in order for the mind to be able to navigate the world and keep the organism alive and healthy. And this being the case, it is also a mechanism that keeps the mind from becoming unhinged. So when a baby is born, you could say that that little entity has mind at large. It has no concepts, it has no divisions. It is in a soup of consciousness that is undifferentiated. But as soon as there is separation from mother, and as soon as the learning starts to take place, then separation and individuation start to take place, and all these object relations begin to take place. So the ego builds a conceptual world for itself, and it navigates it. And part of doing this includes blocking certain things off. And a lot of what the ego blocks off, or most of what it blocks off, are experiences that prove to be threatening to the system as a whole, threatening to its integrity, both physical but also especially mental. And so it kind of severs them off in a mechanism known as splitting and projection. So the splitting is the part where many sensations in the body are sort of severed off or blocked away. That's normal developmental trauma. And then throughout life come also very tough experiences that we also cut off. So we stop feeling our heart for a big part, or we stop feeling the throat or the belly and your solar plexus. So you cut yourself off from many of the intense experiences that all these areas can produce when the individual is faced with situations that go beyond their threshold of what can be processed, understood, and successfully navigated. Now, so it's safe to say that by age, I don't know, 3, 5, you have already a rudimentary ego, and then that only becomes more sophisticated over time. So when we start to learn about spirituality, we start to learn that these all these splits and all those projections that we're making are fundamentally unhealthy, because they were born out of a defense mechanism. They are not the most optimal way in which a mind can operate. And by that, there's a tendency to then vilify the function of the ego as something that therefore is to be gotten rid of as quickly and efficiently as possible. And in a sense, that is throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because as you can imagine, the ego is there as a kind of guardian of the integrity and the homeostasis of the system, so that you don't face states of dysphoria that might drive you into depression or suicide, or that you don't experience states of complete overwhelm. So that if a grown adult would be thrown into mind at large in the way that they were when they were 2 months old, we essentially call that schizophrenia, right? So there are no boundaries, and the mind is just completely unhinged, and that's not necessarily healthy either, right? So you could imagine. So this is also what another point that I wanted to make about this is. So you can reframe the function of the ego as a function that is regulatory, and that is keeping you keeping a certain homeostasis and reducing dysphoria, or so that you can be functional, essentially. Of course, we want to be more than functional, and that's by definition the endeavor, right? So you want to really experience higher states of mind and more peace, more love, and all the good stuff. However, you don't want to do that at the expense of being a fully functional on the physical and mental levels, right? So those don't need to be exclusive of one another. Now, so where it gets interesting is also when certain teachers or books invite you to be super vigilant so that the ego doesn't get the better of you, right? So you're like, oh, you gotta be watching it all the time, and if your practice is based on ego, then it's completely spoiled. And when you deal with people, are you dealing from ego? Are you being needy? Do you have desire, right? Are you looking into the future? Do you want things, or or are you completely carefree and happy-go-lucky? So that's in a sense, it's of course inviting a certain understanding of what the outcome and what the right attitude and sort of what the Buddhists would call wise view would be like. Um, at the same time, it can be enormously frustrating during development to hear that you can't really trust the ego, because when you are developing yourself in your meditative practice, your sense of identity is completely egoic based, right? Like there's very little that is sort of pure awareness in you as what you call yourself to be, and that goes into very very late stages of the practice from what I understand. So the sense of individuality is the very last thing to actually drop. It is not until many other object relations have been eroded in the mind that that core actually goes, so that there is no center anymore. So that is to say that you can't really trick it, and you can't really outsmart it, because as I said when I wrote that the ego has wisdom and is a measure of wisdom, it has wisdom in a sense that it's trying to keep you sane. It's not something you want to just unplug willy-nilly. Not that you would have the chance to do that. To do that, you would have to go maybe into a very strong type of like guru shaktipat experience, or maybe psychedelic experience, which is temporary. Um, but so it has wisdom because it's it's keeping things in a way that you can process and navigate on a constant basis, and therefore it's kind of smarter than you are at the start, like way smarter. It has it has things under control in its own kind of flawed way, but nevertheless stable. And so that's why it has wisdom. But when I say it is a measure of wisdom, what I mean to say is that it is only through actually demonstrating to the ego that there's a certain environment or situation in which is no longer necessary, in which it is completely redundant, that the ego actually subsides. There's no other way to make it subside than to render it redundant through the acquisition of a deep awareness of the source of what would have been an egoic response in a certain situation. So you can imagine the ego as the ultimate guardian. So he's always kind of watching, right? And he's watching left and right for threats and things, and and then it responds and it reacts. It's fully reactive in nature, fully defensive. That's why it's not the most optimal mode of mind, but it's extremely good at doing that. Now, when you face a certain situation comes in, and the ego sees the situation through its filters, and then it's going to watch how you respond, right? It's going to watch the response of the system to that situation. If the response is a strong emotional reaction, the ego is going to go, I better stay egoic about this, because this system has not learned how to process this thing equanimously and sort of in a chilled kind of way, right? Now, during such a reaction, you then have the opportunity to observe the reaction and do the typical self-inquiry and meditative process to understand where it comes from, feel it fully, and all the kind of good stuff that we've talked about. And if you do that in a sustained kind of way, you file away at the reactive mechanism, at the little self that reacts on that kind of situation. Suppose that the situation was somebody cutting you off at the supermarket, and that really pisses you off. Now, if you start to follow that down into its source, you may come to realize that it reminds you of a certain instance in childhood that brought up a deep sense of powerlessness, right? Like I don't know how to stand up for myself, type of thing. And having identified that, then you work at that core level of the fear. So you work at eroding the sense of powerlessness by feeling it fully. Now that's going to take time, of course, right? So you just hack away at it for as long as you need to, and over time, the reactivity starts to go down. So the measure of how egoic your response is equal to the measure of how how much an appropriate response the system can automatically. So because it's not about like, oh, being nice and spiritual. No, how much of a measured and equanimous response can the system can muster by default. And as that reactivity starts to go down, then the egoicness of the response starts to go down in equal measure, because they are actually one and the same, right? So they're no different from one another. That's why you can't outsmart it. You can't outsmart your own reactivity. Is really what it comes down to. It has its own wisdom. It's trying to protect you, and the way to quote unquote outsmart it is to render it irrelevant by eroding the root of why it pops up in the first place, which is unprocessed and undigested emotions or feelings that have been there, and some of which may be very, very deeply rooted, right? So that's it, right? Not too long a video, but I thought it would be it was interesting to comment a little bit on this idea of ego being something that you have to constantly be on the lookout for, lest it sort of catches you out, or that you need to be better than it. You're not. You can't be, right? Because the you that's trying to do that is sort of the same ego, and it cannot outsmart itself. So what you do is you work indirectly at the level of somatics and awareness, and you use those as tools to render the whole mechanism redundant, by just making it not necessary anymore, and getting to the root cause of why reactivity is popping up. So I hope that helps, and I'll be back with more, hopefully while I'm still in Japan. Cheerio. Bye.